These podcasts are always interesting because, what do you want to pick up on?
There's another piece to that, though, specifically around AI as well, which is, how do I know which model to select?
I heard from customer after customer that's been on these stages that have kind of said the unexpected thing out loud, which was,
you are listening to the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast, or AI with ML. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. The AI with Maribel Lopez podcast is brought to you by the Data for Betterment Foundation. This podcast shares the stories of the people behind the new world of data and AI. What are they creating, and why does it matter? If you like this episode, please subscribe so you can easily find the podcast again. You can find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com at AI with Maribel Lopez. You can also share your feedback and ideas with me on X, also known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. All links are in the show notes. Extended show notes, episodes, and transcripts can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcast. I hope you'll enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Maribel Lopez with the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast, and we're having another multi-analyst podcast at AWS reInvent. I'm super excited about this to get lots of different perspectives, and we're each going to use this for our respective podcasts. I'm going to start by passing over to Tim to introduce himself. Tim Crawford.
Thanks, Maribel. Tim Crawford, strategic advisor and former CIO at Avoa.
Liz.
hi everyone, Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research.
All right, so we're all here and we have heard many announcements at the show.
One or two.
Fire hose of announcements.
Fire hose of announcements. These podcasts are always interesting because, what do you want to pick up on? So we thought we might start at a bit of a higher level and then maybe go down a little more detailed. Tim, I know that you and I were talking earlier about the concept of the maturing of AWS, since we've all been to a few reInvents now, not our first reInvent rodeo here, people. So tell me what you're thinking about where AWS is today and how that might apply to the CIO landscape.
Yeah, attending more than 10 of these definitely gives you a little bit of experience.
As both a CIO and as an analyst, right?
That's right.
As a customer and an analyst. Yeah,
that's right.
It's a different perspective on this, people.
And that's the lens, right? Having led IT most of my career, I definitely come to these conversations and the presentations with a totally different perspective, I think, than most people have. One of the things that I thought was remarkable in this keynote, specifically with Matt Garman, is new CEO. So he's got to put his fingerprints on the company, and he's not new to Amazon. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting was kind of the measured approach that he took. Yeah. So there's definitely a different vibe to the keynote. And some that don't have the experience of Amazon and see the behind the scenes might go, whoa, so they're maturing, which is a good thing, but they're slowing down too. And that's absolutely not the case. I think there's definitely a more holistic view.
Yeah.
There's some consolidation plays that are happening, which I think will bode well for customers. But they're also thinking about what's next, and that velocity, that acceleration is continuing within Amazon. Mm-hmm. So you get the best of both worlds there, which I think is going to be really important.
So one of the things I think was interesting about this was to try to distill it into a few themes, right? And I think that's what Matt really tried to do, because if you look at any of these conferences, we've seen a lot of announcements. It's usually in the hundreds of feature announcements, right? So how do you pull that up into something that's a story that both highlights the breadth of Amazon, but doesn't get you into the full technical weeds? Having said that, it was a very long keynote with a lot of different technologies that were announced.
That was a lot.
So,
marathon.
Marathon. Liz, give us your perspective.
So the funny thing is, for me and reInvent, I've had to reinvent what I was looking at every year that I've come, right? I've literally had to reinvent it every year.
She's channeling the reInvent.
I am channeling the whole meaning of this event, because every time there's a different offering that could be really relevant, especially for the folks that I talk to, right? When I talk to CMOs, when I talk to experience officers, revenue officers, when I talk at that CX front line, tends to be very functional. And their view of AWS has always been, if I'm super honest, a bit of confusion. Because especially if, let's just take the CMO. as that one, the marketing and sales, marketing advertising leader. When they're approached by Amazon, a lot of times it's actually through Amazon marketing and advertising, which is a different group that is not traditionally here at reInvent. Yes. But this year was the first year I started to hear that all of it came back to the data. Yeah. All of it came back to the metadata. Right. And I think the big word and the thing that I am probably tracking the most for 2025 is it all comes back to the knowledge. Right. Because we're starting to reinvent, sorry to keep stealing the pun, I will pay a quarter to whoever I owe it to, but
license it.
I know, we're just gonna license it, sorry. But there is that reinvention that's happening around how we articulate the reason why we're building all of these repositories. Why is Bedrock so important? Yeah. Why, as a CMO, should I ask the question of, hey, where are we putting all of these things? Should I be asking different questions when someone comes in and shouts SageMaker in my face, right? So I think it's really about how we're reinventing the why of, I really do need a different knowledge repository because the FAQ isn't cutting it anymore, right? I think there are different functional tasks that we're starting to look at. I think the interesting part of that, and I think that Matt Garman really hit that nail on the head during our analyst Q&A, which is, it's not a change in strategy. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about a change in direction. My colleague Holger Mueller asked the question okay, are you changing strategy from Adam Slipsky? Are you changing strategy from Andy Jassy? Yeah. Where are you gonna be? And I think you and I even talked about this, where is that fingerprint going to be of the Matt Garman years? I think it was more in the sense of, yes, we're AWS. Yes, we have all of these tools. Yes, you just sat in front of a fire hose and you all lived. But we also are looking at where those partnerships and where those key areas of who's carrying a bigger bucket to help you bring some of that water along. You sat in front of the fire hose, but we're also providing the foundation for the buckets so you can carry it more effectively. And I really liked that message, but I think it goes back to something you were just talking about. We talk about a lot of things when we're not on cameras, but it's kind of like the bedrockization or what we're calling it.
I called it Bedrock Palooza in our call, to be fair. And I said SageMakerization and Bedrock Paloozaing of everything. But having said that, I think it's getting to the point that both of you spoke about. First, we just talked about cloud and how we're going to move everything to the cloud, and there was data,
which was a mistake.
Which was
that was a mistake. The marketing stuck.
Yeah.
But that was a mistake to set that stage that everything moves to cloud. Yep. And I think now we're
Matt
in the
reality. Matt even said that. He just said it in the Q&A too.
Yeah. So I think we've gotten out of that, but perhaps if we had to distill it, the most interesting thing for me, which gets back to the point that Liz just made, is we've started talking a lot of it was data and now it's knowledge and now it's insight, and they're putting the products behind that. I laughed about the Bedrock and the SageMaker. But I think the reason we saw so much SageMaker is it was around the concept of how do you take the data and make it into something interesting.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about price performance, which had always been a cloud computing message, but we also went into a lot around things that got you more accuracy. So how do you do graph RAG to make the data that you want to put with foundation models better? How do we do, queue and quick sites so that you can actually have people ask more natural language questions? How do we create foundation models with visualization and natural language for people that may not be able to, do all the technical stuff? So I think we've tried to move it closer to more of a, what do we do with the data? How do we make the data more interesting?
Yeah. And I think it's important to maybe add a little bit of color or context to that too. So I agree with you. I mean, you talk about the CMO and how the CMO is confused when you look at the bevy of the portfolio that is AWS, which is incredibly impressive and has been impressive. Yep. Mm-hmm. But it's also overwhelming, and the CIO has the same issue. And it's not just the CIO. As you go down into into the organization, you have the same problem. But going to your point, Maribel, is that when you think about the context, going back several years, we were very much in a builder mindset, and there was a separation between technology and business. Now, if you go through the anthropology of IT, we actually started where business and technology were one and together, meaning you had technology was solving business problems. And we kind of got away from that over the last several decades.
It became disconnected, I think.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so now there's been this incredible pressure and push to bring those closer together. And so in order to do that, and this is the context, is what is the business problem we're truly trying to solve? And that's not a technology conversation. Yeah. And in order to understand that, we need data. We need the data and the insights. And so this is where I think you start to see the driving of, let's get the data together, let's start to understand and characterize the data, derive the insights from it, and this has to be more than just an IT conversation too. Yeah. So that means that now we need the CMOs, we need the other line of business folks to get more involved.
We talked about HRs, another example.
That's right.
Another great example.
Right.
I do have one beef though with where it's gone, and I think my issue is, because we've gone to a lot of conferences, right? And depending on which conference you went to, if you went to like a Dell or an HPE, it was all about private and hybrid cloud, right? And here we are at AWS, and it's all still about public cloud. And I think we still have data islands, right?
Without question.
So all of the things that we spoke about, really require you to be more cloud friendly with your data. And so does that isolate what certain people can do? So even when they talk about regulated industries, the regulated industry use cases are people that have decided to fundamentally go all in on cloud. And okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we have a lot of people that haven't fully gone into the cloud, or they want to keep
Matt
some
even
of
said this morning, 20% of workloads have moved to cloud.
Yeah. So then the question is, well, what are we doing with the other 80? Like, some of them we don't need. Okay, that's
right.
Those
people stay where they
Some
are.
of them could go away fundamentally.
Yes.
Nobody would
go
miss
away
you
would be
as a
just
worker.
fine.
Yes. Okay, we take those out. We have some that are already in the cloud, but I do think that we still have a data gap. And I've said this before, and I continue to say it. We end up with everything is great if I'm all in someone's island.
But we've been talking about that for decades, it feels like. I mean, as a marketer, I can remember the very early onsets of you're not going to go anywhere unless you personalize. And you can't reach personalization without data. And so everyone's like, okay, great, let me go get me some data. And then I'm going to have this miraculous thing called personalization. Fast forward 30 years, we still don't quite have it yet. And that's a big problem. I think that when we keep focusing on the where and the what, we completely miss the business value output, which I was really impressed with Matt's conversation of, we look to find where we can make differentiated value as opposed to where we can just drive value. And I would say
where do you plug in partners so that you
like,
have that whatever you need.
If a partner's doing a great job at it, build on AWS. Don't just plug in, have an API. There wasn't any of that kind of surface layer, frivolous, but you could plug in a cord here. That wasn't the conversation, which I really appreciated, because I think as the business user who often has to foot the bill for things we never see, you come to the CMO, you come to the head of service, you come to the head of experience, or heaven forbid, you go to the guy who's running sales. And you say, we're going to do this whole AWS overhaul, and it's going to be amazing for you. And you're like,
and I'm like, why?
And then you're expecting this big pile of glorious data, and it's going to be
for those of you that might be
actionable.
Listening. There was a big hands out move from Liz.
It's a whole thing. But I think that we have been talking about things like, there have been in vogue phrases over the past, let's say even just 20 years of, I don't just need data, I need actionable data. I don't just need actionable data, I need actionable insights. And so we kind of keep adding this whole layer of verbiage around data. But here we sit in this age of generative AI, where we want AI to be the new magical glitter cannon that solves all of our problems. And we, I think, all now realize that's not going to happen. We're all looking for those practical applications. But the reality here is that we are stuck in this weird gap where we are drowning in data and absolutely dying of thirst. We don't have the data that can actually make a lot of these motions meaningful, which is also why I've really enjoyed the conversations around Q.
I was just going to go there.
Q business.
Q for business, very specifically Q for business. And then I think there's the language challenge that I hope after reInvent, everyone has some clarity around there is Q for business, there is Q in Connect, and there is Q in QuickSight, right? So you have things that are purpose-built for things like Connect that are ready to roll out of the box. There's things like business. The thing I would want to say about Q for business, and really how all of that data is not only structured, but how it's ingested, how the metadata is then stored and automated, and how all of that remains with the object, it remains with the event, it remains with the record. That is critically important. I hope that we see some more thought leadership around that. I hope we start to see more language that makes that accessible to the business user so that they understand that what we're not building here are more of those functional islands. I'm not building a fiefdom of contact center language intelligence that only impacts my agent. In fact, what I'm doing with Q for Business is allowing someone in product to ask a centralized question that says,
without even needing to know where all the different data is,
without needing to know where the islands are, right? It's like I keep thinking of, okay, my daughter plays Animal Jam. Has anyone heard of this game, Animal Jam? Okay, it's like these little animals, they go onto all these little islands, and they can go collect coconuts on everyone's different island, but then you always get stuck on an island, and then you can't get your animal off the island, and it's like, oh my God,
this is a perfect analogy.
And I watch her play this, and that's all I think of for all these little, like all these islands of coconuts, and if I want to ask, why is my product failing? Why do my customers not react to my product the way I think they're going to? And all of that information's been stuck in customer service, and the answer is because your product doesn't work, right?
But that's frankly missing the point, because for a long time we've been doing more of a bottoms-up conversation around this. And Amazon in some ways has been brilliant about this. In other ways, I think has been with many tech companies has been a little laxed in this, in the sense that we have to shift that conversation to understand the why. So it's not just the mechanics of bringing the data together, but understanding why we're bringing together and what is that real problem we're trying to solve for.
It's but do you think that it's that people? So I kind of look at it from a different perspective, in that I don't think that organizations have missed the point of why. I think organizations have looked past the why because they're really, really busy playing "Don't touch my button."
Well,
because why reveals a whole lot that they have resisted doing because it hasn't been in their best interest.
Yeah, but that's the same argument, quite frankly, of great. So we've done it in the wrong way for so long that now we've developed these bad behaviors.
Right.
And so should we accommodate the bad behaviors moving forward?
No, we've just
or
automated
do we need
them.
Well, but this is part of the problem. I think
you take a bad process, you make it faster. It's RPA on steroids now with generative AI.
But we need to be clear about this. And kind of to your earlier point, one of the things that I think Amazon is trying to work through, but they have not been able to do a good job of yet, is that continuum of SageMaker to Bedrock to Q for Business to QuickSight. Why do I need these different tools, and where do they fit in, and what's the problem they're solving for? So as I'm coming with the problem, with that business problem, where do I get started? Do I start with SageMaker? Do I start with Bedrock? And the answer is going to be different for each customer and each problem. But there needs to be that framework or that foundation. And this is what I mean about the maturing.
But I also think it also shouldn't necessarily matter of the where did you start. I think people get really hung up on the which name do I start with, which I think goes to your point of the SageMakerization or the mega SageMakerization of everything. Because if I have to know where I have to start, it gives me another excuse to never have the discussion of why I should start to begin with.
But here's the problem with that I fear is, as SageMaker and Bedrock come closer and closer together and actually start to overlap in terms of functionality with each other, then it becomes more important to understand where do I get started to be able to solve my problem.
But actually, I thought that Matt Garman made a really good point about this when he was in the room with the analysts, and he was basically talking about, hey, if you're a developer, they're the Bedrock audience, right? So the audience,
they're the SageMaker audience.
Well, they're both, but the chance that the person from HR or the CMO is going to be doing the Bedrock decision is a no, right? So Bedrock's a foundation, and the thing I liked where a lot of the services went was, if you assume something like Bedrock has lots of AI tooling, right, which is what a managed services should have, a lot of the other Amazon products can dip into that without you even knowing that you're using something in Bedrock. So if you want to use guardrails and your developers have set policies and guardrails can be available in your queue for QuickSight, and it's not like a whole re-roll, right? So there's some reuse and interesting stuff. But actually, if we look at both of your points, it sort of depends on which audience we're talking to, right? So what we still have to get to is there are some people that still need to understand the technology that are buying the right set of building blocks.
Right.
And they have to still connect with the person that wants to have an outcome and say, okay, what's your outcome that you're looking for? And then I can figure out, all the things that I might need to buy in Bedrock. I can figure out if SageMaker is the right thing. I found myself sitting there saying, okay, so if I don't want to use SageMaker, is this a bad thing? Like, is this still going to work? Do I still get the Amazon goodness? So there was that question that was sort of in my mind, and I'll spend some time trying to figure out where that line falls off.
There's another piece to that, though, specifically around AI as well, which is how do I know which model to select? Then you get into this price performance conversation about
we've pulled her string. Oh Lord.
Do I use NVIDIA? Do I use Intel? Do I use AMD? Do I use Trainium? Do I use Graviton? I mean, the point is, I think we need a degree of automation from the tools to help guide us. But there's another piece here, and maybe this is just the IT in me coming out, but there's also a cultural shift that needs to happen. Like I talk with...
It's not like you invest in the one thing, right? Well, which you're used to.
It's funny because, as an example, I talk with CIOs that are excited about looking at the possibility of bringing these new NVIDIA GPUs into their data center. And I'm like,
do you really want to build?
You're going in there plugging it in yourself? What are you doing?
No. It's worse than that. You're smoking crack.
You're not even going to get the NVIDIA GPU.
Guess what?
With the CUDA.
You can't get it. You can't get it. You don't have the organization to be able to develop around it. 100%. You can't keep it filled up.
That's why you go to AWS, because you can't get it. You don't know how to use it.
You can't use air cooling to cool those chips. You need water.
You need liquid cooling, and that's
a
whole other kettle of fish.
You are not okay with water in your data center.
Raise your hand if you know CUDA. That's my other question. Raise my hand if you got an army doing that.
Props to NVIDIA. They do have a lot of people that know CUDA, right?
And NVIDIA.
They have
and within that ecosystem,
if anybody knew anything, they would know CUDA. But it gets back to your normal thing. It's do they? Okay, models. All right, so first we did, what was AI? First AI was it's all data scientists. Then we went to, it's all chips. Then we went to, there are all these models. And now we're getting to the point that you're talking about. There's no Lord of the Rings model. There's no Lord of the Rings queue where there's one queue to rule it all. There's not one model to rule it all.
I'd like to see that.
There won't be one, but more importantly, if there isn't one, there isn't guidance to know which model should I use for what particular purpose.
Do we remember, wait a minute, do we remember the age when we had to anthropomorphize every single model that every single individual vendor came out with, to the point where we wanted to see some type of weird cage match where it was going to be Einstein versus Leonardo, who's taking who down? I really wanted to see that happen.
Ding.
Yeah,
but this will become transparent. And the thing that I thought Swami announced today that was so cool was the concept of intelligent prompt routing. Because when he talked about intelligent prompt routing, he was basically the intelligent prompt routing service is going to figure out the best model at the right price performance for your use case and route the prompt there. Which to me said, okay, hopefully, while it's wonderful that AWS and everybody stands up and talks about all the models that they're going to have, at some point as a buyer, I don't want to care. I just want to know that you have enough that are optimized for the possibility. And I think, to your point, Tim, we're finally getting there, and maybe they don't need to do all the evaluation on their own, because performance-wise, a lot of these models are pretty close. Some of it's about time, some of it is about cost, sometimes it's about performance because you have a really extremely intense application that needs performance. But your garden variety enterprise, it's probably good enough, right? So now we're trading off. Today. So now we're trading off, and it'll be, and the other thing too that I don't think we've gotten to yet is, if you look at somebody like Autodesk, if you look at Adobe, these people are already like figuring out how to do their own foundation models that are appropriate for their application, which someone's going to buy at the app layer. They're not buying it at the like AWS layer. And they're the ones that are working. Autodesk spent a lot of time talking about how they were working with AWS and 50% faster development of their foundation models. I thought that was pretty fabulous personally. But having said that, that's where I think this goes. So I agree your point is intense and it's annoying as hell right now, but I'm hoping that like in a year, we're not even going to care.
I think the price performance actually is going to come up faster than we think. I mean, just last year at reInvent, met with a bank who was talking about bringing new customers on. And they're mostly online. So this isn't a JP Morgan Chase that has a branch on every block, but this is one that is bringing new customers in at a click of 1 million new customers a month. So 1 million a month.
That's what one calls scale.
Damn.
But I was having this conversation about price performance, and they said, look, we have to find any way possible to reduce the customer acquisition cost.
Right.
Because of the volume, the scale.
Right.
And so for them, using some of this custom or specialized processors that Amazon has, like Gravitron and
That's
Trainium.
a win for
Trainium,
them.
yeah.
It's a total win for them because the price performance is much more applicable. They can make the numbers work. Using a more general purpose solution like an NVIDIA or Intel or even AMD solution, the efficiency isn't there. The specialization and efficiency isn't there. And we could even get into a whole conversation about how this whole chip market is going to play out. But I'll just say, based on what I see,
Do we have to?
No.
We're pretty close to wrap at this point. We're getting the hook.
Okay, all right.
So I want you to finish your thought, Tim. Then we're going to go to Liz for a final comment.
But I do think that price performance and bringing the focus in with value, not cost, value.
Yep.
If I'm spending $1 million a month with Amazon, is that a bad thing?
It's not the lowest cost, it's the best value for
That's
what
right.
you're doing. Yep,
That's
I got
absolutely
you.
right. And so
Perfect.
that's where the conversation needs to go.
And I
Liz,
think that
final
spend
thoughts.
has to get easy. And I heard from customer after customer that's been on these stages that have kind of said the unexpected thing out loud, which was, I really liked being able to turn it on when I was experimenting and then turn it off.
Yeah.
And I'm not having to play the credit over here, credit over there. I want to test that model out, so then the credit goes over here. That game of let's move the dollar bill and the credit under the walnut, they don't want to play it. They do not want to play it. It's not predictable. It's not actually working out in anyone's favor. And heard 2 banks, 1 healthcare organization, and a retail customer all say the same thing in the last 2 days, which was, I wasn't going to actually engender the trust of my business if I couldn't show them that I could do it quickly, I could do it reliably, and I could do it within a cost structure that worked for the business, that was a value to the customer.
AKA provide value.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think to the other point, we talked about getting easier. We actually did see the marketplaceization of things, right?
100%.
So I think that really trying to dial in how people buy, how people turn on and off, streamlining the contracting process.
Yes.
We got it. If we want to productize stuff, we got to get up faster.
Can you say that again? I mean, because that's a really important point, especially as you talk about licensing going from perpetual licensing to subscription to usage-based, and now we're seeing token-based pricing. And I, like you, am having conversations with CIOs that are scratching their head going, I can't even get my arms around consumption-based pricing.
Well,
how am I going to manage the token?
And not everybody uses the word token the same way.
That's right.
You know that.
But to your point, simplification is going to be important.
Yep. And that's it, folks. We are doing value. We are doing simplification. We are doing tons of technology announcements. Thanks for listening to our reInvent podcast.
Thank you for listening. Additional content can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcasts. Until next time, wishing you all the best.